And so let's take a look at another type of enum. And so what I mean by that is there are two types of enums. One is an unscoped enum, and the other is a scoped enum. An unscoped enum is what we looked at prior, where we did enum colors, and then red equals 1, green, and then blue, and so on. This is a unscoped enum. What that means is that the enumerators, such as red, green, blue, and so on, are capable of being accessed and used from anywhere in the file without needing to specify that it comes from colors. And so to exemplify this, if we want to do a practice function such as void f, and then we did int some color equals red, that will be equal to 1 because that is the enumerator's value. We didn't need to specify that it comes from colors. Well, what if in this function we have another variable called red and we have it to set to a different value? What will some color be equal to? Well, it'll be equal to 5 because both red and some color in this scope are within the same function. They're in the same scope. So some color will take the value of this red instead of the enumerator red. So what if we didn't want that? What if we wanted some color to be equal to our enumerator red? Well, there's two ways we can do this. One is to use the scope resolution operator. That's a long name. And the way we use that is through the two colons. And the reason why C++ has us do this is it tells the compiler where we're getting our information from, our values or our functions or etc. So in this case, we want to get red from colors. And so now because we've used these two colons, we've specified that red is coming from colors. And so you can remember that these two colons, again, it's called the scope resolution operator. It just tells the compiler where we're getting something. In this case, we are telling the compiler through these two colons that red is supposed to come from colors. And so now some color will have the value of 1. However, another way of doing this is through using a scoped enum, which is the more preferred method of secure code, of using of sort of more good practice code in real world applications. So I'm going to go ahead and delete these lines right here. And so the way we do a scoped enum is kind of like how we did a unscoped enum. We use the enum keyword, and then we use another keyword after this called class. You don't need to worry about what class does by itself at the moment, but just keep in mind that when it's paired with enum, then that means we're using a scoped enum. So next we do the name for enum. In this case we can do colors again. Red equals 1, and then green, and then blue. And just like with a regular unscoped enum, green will have a value of 2, blue will have a value of 3, and so on. The values continue to increment. That is the same thing between both enumerators, or between both enum types. But what's different is two things. One, the color. So we need to specify that we're accessing these enumerators from color, unlike the unscoped enumerator where we use those two colons. We didn't need to use that for an unscoped, but for a scoped enum, we do. We do need to use those two colons. We have to, or else the compiler will not allow us to access these enumerators. The second thing is that these do not have these enumerators. Unlike an unscoped enum, they do not have an underlying type. They do not have the type of integer. Even though we gave red, in this case, a value of 1, even though we did that, it still does not have the type of an integer. So we need to actually specify that it does. And the way we do that is not through using the colon and then int, like I showed you previously, where this is what the compiler does. It sets the underlying type of these enumerators to an int. That's not what the compiler. That's not what we do for the scoped enum. We don't do that. What we do is we use casting. Casting is a way of temporarily changing the type of a variable. So in this case, what we want to do is just say we have a variable called SumColor. We're going to use the scope resolution operator. If you remember, let's see, 2 colons. So in this case, colors, and then red. This is going to specify again that we're getting red from this enum. And there are 2 ways of doing casting. One way, which is the older way, is to use the parentheses and then put the type in the middle of them. In this case, we want to cast red to an integer because our variable that we're working with is also an integer. We want to use the same type that we're casting from and then casting into. And so that is one way of doing it. It is a simple way. The problem with this though is there's not really that much checking that goes into it. So it's kind of unsafe, but there are not very many places where it's going to make that much of a difference. But the new way of doing it with C++ is to use static cast. And then the way you use this is through the less than and greater than symbols to specify the type inside of them. So type is going to go ahead inside these symbols over here, less than and greater than, and then like a function, you're going to use two parentheses to pass red into static cast like a function. So what this is going to do is it's going to take red, which comes from colors, and it's going to cast it into an integer so that it can be so the value behind it, which is 1, can be assigned to some color. And if we didn't cast it, then we would get a error, because if you remember, again, as I said, these enumerators, they don't have a type. It's like declaring a variable, like some variable equals 1. Well, see, the compiler doesn't know, like, what is this an integer? Is this a double? Is this a character? It doesn't know. So we need to tell the compiler that we're temporarily giving this enumerator a type, in this case, an integer. And so again, this is one way of doing it. The other way is, again, using the parentheses int, or the parentheses type of casting. This is the older way. It comes from the C language. You can use whichever method you think would be easier for you to memorize. So again, just to recap, the difference between a scoped enum and an unscoped enum is, again, you don't need the class keyword for an unscoped enum. The enums for a unscoped enum, such as here, are going to be by default an integer. So red, green, and blue are going to be an integer for an unscoped. And for a scoped enum, such as here, red, green, and blue will not have an integer type. It won't have a double type. It won't have any type. So we do need to cast it for a scoped enum, but we do not need to cast it for an unscoped enum because it does have an underlying type. So I do hope this was helpful in to your practice with enums.